Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. We've got two all-new Dogman stories for you today. One is recent. It's technically possibly still an ongoing case. The other is a collection of memories of Dogman dating back to the early 1970s. Both of them are pretty scary and exciting, and we'll get straight to them right after I've pointed out that today's executive producer is Dot Connector. Thanks, Dot Connector. We couldn't do it without your help. By the way, Dot Connector has a great channel that you should check out. It's got some interesting takes on interesting subjects, so please support him there. If you would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like the famous Dot Connector, just join our handy-dandy and affordable paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Yes, we know you just spent all your money on toilet paper, but I promise we are at least as valuable as... Alright, I'm not even going to finish that sentence. And now let's get to our first story, which was sent to us just a couple of days ago and is our first story ever to directly refer to the current pandemic situation going on that we're all having to deal with. Being socially isolated or even quarantined can be awful, as some of us are beginning to learn, but imagine being quarantined with Dogman trying to break in at you. All I know is that if that happened to me, I'd say the same thing that this guy is saying, which is, Dogman is making me paranoid. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was growing up, my family lived out in the country. My father commuted long distances daily to give us a clean and natural upbringing. I myself spent my adulthood along with my wife living in cramped city dwellings. When we decided we could afford to retire, we both wanted to find a nice spot in the country, then possibly adopt children and give them the kind of childhood I was given. Well, we got as far as purchasing a property and moving in, but we can't consider adoption because Dogman is making me paranoid. Now don't get me wrong, I know there's more than one Dogman. I know it's a species out there somewhere, but when I use the word, I'm referring to one particular and specific Dogman, one who won't stop hounding me, if you'll forgive the bad pun. My wife says she's not sure that she's seen what I'm talking about. She says she's seen shadows moving out of the corner of her eye, but by the time she turns her head, nothing seems out of the ordinary. So it might be the Dogman, or it might have been a bird flying by, or even the shadow of an airplane passing over the yard. For now at least, she's caught in a sort of middle world of percentage chance realities. Maybe her husband is actually seeing a dog-headed bipedal carnivore unknown to science. Or maybe her husband is going crazy. In that case, she wants to root for me being sane as her first choice. Then she examines that choice and realizes that in either case, adoption is out of the question, at least in that location. Either she is living among habituated man-eating predators, or else she is living with an aging man whose mental capacities were likely not up to the challenges of child-rearing and were more likely to get worse than better. You should be able to understand by now how it matters a great deal to me that my wife also sees the Dogman. The stress that the creature and the situation is putting on me is slowly creating a reality in which we will both be habituated by Dogman, and I will be completely insane. The creature seems to almost laugh at me and my predicament, or perhaps that's actual early-stage paranoia creeping into my thinking. It seems to know When my wife and I are on opposite sides of the house, it seems to know when it could come harass me, and my wife will not see any of it. She says it's paranoid to think that an animal would do such a thing, try to drive a man mad, but leave his spouse alone. She said I was giving animals human qualities. But the Dogman, he isn't just some kind of an animal. He thinks. It's not exactly the way humans think, but he thinks. And what he thinks are mean thoughts. Dogman is a kind of a wild man who is so dominant over his environment that he is always, or at least usually, very well fed. This leaves him leisure time, and in his leisure time, Dogman likes to push around the lower life forms and laugh at them. I don't think he usually eats humans because he seems to see us as fellow predators, or possibly even as his cousins in some sense, but he enjoys that he ranks above us in the food chain. He's like a jock rubbing a nerd's face in the grass just because he can. He has no morality. His manner of making a living is sneaking up on things and savagely murdering them, then lapping up their remains. That's what nature designed Dogman to do, assuming his design was natural at least. I'm not a wise man, and I don't know if there are such things as absolute good or absolute evil. I do know that, relative to humanity, it would be hard to find something more relatively evil than the Dogman. It would also be hard to find something more potentially dangerous to us. The Dogman in our neighborhood seemed to have decided that it was uproariously funny to constantly remind me personally of all of this. I used to watch this TV reality program where four ugly brothers from Staten Island did horrible things to each other. It used to make me laugh until one day I realized that the Dogman is like those ugly brothers, and I was the one being punished every single week. That's, I think, when the Dogman started to really get to me, and he was in my head at that point. I don't mean he psychically broadcasted to me in microwaves or anything. I mean, he had me thinking about him even when he wasn't there. He had won the head game, and I still hadn't even realized there was a head game going on. Dogman is a better chess player than I am. Dogman thinks a few steps ahead. He's not just an animal. He's like a skilled warrior with lots of free time he uses to completely screw up the lives of whoever he thinks it's funny to mess with. So I hear you asking, not literally, I mean figuratively, I hear you asking me, what this supposed Dogman supposedly did in the first place that was so horrible that it made me have all these first world problems with my alleged sanity. The answer to that question is, he stared at me. He displayed himself before me so that I could not ever again doubt the very real nature of his existence. And he stared at me. He comes to me when I'm alone, and he sees how long he can stare at me until I notice him there. When I do notice these days, I exit the room immediately, but for a long time when this began, I would not at first be certain what I was looking at. He would be standing still, observing, covered in shadow, and it would always be at night or just before dawn. I would be certain there was a presence there, a consciousness, but I couldn't see what it was for sure. Then he would do something so that I would be sure. One time he ran away out of the trees following a diagonal path to me. It was the most shocking thing that had happened to me up to that point in my life, and I was not a young man when that happened. It was a fully unclothed humanoid creature, much taller than myself, and its head was like that of a dog. It had long donkey ears way on top of its head. It seemed to stare at me as it ran past, and I turned, watching it go, until I caught my own reflection in the glass. and was horrified by what I looked like. It was as though I were a ghost of myself. Shock gripping my face, my jaw hanging open wider than it should go, and the look of abject fear in my eyes brought a deep sadness into my belly. When I was a kid, I knew that when I grew up, I would have conquered fear as I had grown into a true adult. Instead, as an adult, I lived with the Dogman, and I was more frightened than I had been as a child. I went to read by the window one evening, and there he was, in the bushes. As I was still squinting into the darkness trying to see him more clearly, he burst forth from the foliage and ran toward me, screaming his bloody head off. Or was that me screaming? There was enough shouting in that moment for both of us in either case. He ran right at the window. I thought he was going to dive right through the glass into the room. I thought I was going to be torn apart limb from limb inside my own home. I ran into the bedroom where my wife was, and I collapsed into tears at her feet. I expected to hear the sound of glass as the Dogman followed me inside and did both of us in. The sound never came, and my wife had more anecdotal evidence that my sanity was now long gone. I find it hard not to hate the Dogman. After all, he's such a complete and total dick. At least if a jock makes you look bad in front of your girl, it's because he wants to steal her. If this Dogman succeeds in ruining my marriage, he's just going to leave my wife alone to fend for herself into her old age. He's just being a jerk, and I don't think he's as funny as he thinks he is. I finally convinced my wife that we should talk to real estate people about selling the house and moving. I told her that if I'm going bonkers, selling the house won't change anything. But if I'm sane and speaking honestly, then selling the house would put us in a position to finally adopt the kids we had hoped to raise. We were about to get that going when this stupid virus thing hit, and now we're being asked to stay in our home indefinitely. We have to have our food and supplies delivered. We aren't allowed outside. The Dogman thinks this is all very funny. He hangs out even more now, or else I've gone completely paranoid. I started staying with my wife almost all the time so that he would stay out of my sight. Then, he started knocking on the walls outside to let me know he was still there. He's there all the time now. I don't know when he hunts or eats. Even as I type this, he's outside, tapping on a window in the back. I'm not allowed out because of the quarantine, but this jerk-ass roams free. He can't stop reminding me of it either. He can't stop rubbing it in that he's out there, absolutely free, while my wife and I are doing the social distancing thing against our will. She thinks I've become too clingy, but I'm terrified of being alone. I'm afraid that the next time the Dogman gets me alone, he'll do me in. I feel like he'll make it look like an accident, or that I chose to do it. I feel as though he'd want me to look bad even in death. I admit, this may just be paranoia, but even so, I don't want to be alone if I don't have to be. They keep extending the quarantine, longer and longer. I don't know if I'll be able to survive this virus. My suspicions are that the quarantine may protect me from the illness, but end my life in other ways. But I no longer can tell if that's a sane thought because Dogman is making me paranoid. Early 70s Dogman versus the Swingers. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a werewolf or Dogman sighting story that happened to me personally way back in the early 1970s. I want to say either 1972 or 1973, but nobody who actually lived through those times can remember for sure. It was an extremely different era back then, as most of what people now refer to as the 60s actually happened more in the early 70s. All the free sex and drugs kind of stuff was really more rampant in the Nixon years than it had been in the Johnson ones. Back then, If a girl said "me too," it meant she was inviting herself into your orgy or helping herself to some of your stash. You can think what you want of my generation, but we didn't have AIDS yet. You know what we did have, though? A whole lot of cheap cocaine. You want to know why intellectual stoner art rock faded and was replaced by disco songs with lyrics about dancing to disco songs? Well, I believe I just explained it to you. And so it was, in that heady pre-disco era of ongoing hazy half memories, that I met this lady we can call Linda. Actually, Linda hated to be called a lady. She said that was a word of the patriarchy. It implied that she was of a certain social class or that she behaved in the way that the establishment wanted her to behave. If you think Twitter invented all that way of thinking and talking, you should have met Linda back in 1971 or 74 or whenever this was. Linda called herself liberated, but actually she just had rich and indulgent parents who would finance whatever her new fad interests were. She had gone through hippie and country rock phases that I had been aware of, but once she became liberated, I was on board. I mean, yes, she would lecture you about the patriarchy, but it would always be followed by some far-out, partying. Suffice to say, I was having the time of my life, in between the lectures at least. Linda had a cabin, or obviously her rich family had a cabin that she would take turns staying at. It was off in the country, past the country that the rich people lived in. It was where the people in the hills went when they wanted it even quieter than it was in the hills. I had never met any of her family because they would never slum in the places Linda slummed, and she would never bring any of her slummy friends home to her family estate. In this way, she was able to pull off a sort of almost double life for a number of years. It's not like the family didn't know what she was spending their money on. She was polite enough not to do it in front of their noses, though, so they tolerated each new phase she went through, patient that in the long run, she'd do what the family wanted her to do. And so, I was brought out to the infamous family cabin, and we were both extremely messed up. I mean, just so wasted. She had all sorts of things with her so that we never had to sober up. But there was something in the woods around the cabin that would serve to sober me up extremely quickly. I'm certain that she and I had a ball in the cabin that night. I'm certain because I remember none of it. I do remember waking up early the next morning at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and finding myself alone. I searched the cabin and no Linda. None of her intoxicants either. She seemed to have taken them with her wherever she went. I got worried that she wandered into the icicle-covered forest outside and froze to death or something dumb like that. I put on my boots and coat, and I went outside to look for her footprints in the snow. It only took me a few seconds to notice that her car was missing. She hadn't wandered into the woods. She had wandered into town. I wondered if she had forgotten that I was there, or if I had been too tired to awaken. I also wondered if and when she planned to return. Going inside, I took stock of what I had and did not have. We seemed to have canned soups and a hot plate to heat them on. I found a can opener, too. There was a space heater that heated the small space well enough. The electricity was on. I could not find any sort of telephone. None on any of the walls, none under any of the randomly strewn clothing or lighting fixtures we seemed to have knocked about the previous night in our mindless celebration. No television, one battery-operated radio whose batteries I didn't want to waste, and an 8-track cassette player with a stack of, I think, 6 or 7 8-track cassettes on it. If I recall, it was like Procol Harum, Foghat, Dottie West, Jimi Hendrix, Sam Jones. I might be wrong about one or two of those, but it was that kind of an assortment. I think they must have been picked up in one of those get 6 tapes for $1 ads in a magazine, or maybe in the 50-cent bin at some record store or yard sale. Well, I could survive there for 2 or 3 days at least. I wondered at what point I should start to become panicked about it all. Sitting down at the front window, I tried to get comfortable and watch the road leading up to the cabin for any signs of Linda's return. As night came on, I started to get bored and drowsy. Then something caught my attention, and I brought my eyes back into focus. There was a tree moving in an odd way, and I watched it very closely. I didn't see it moving anymore, and I wondered what had just happened. Then I saw another tree move, and another. There was someone or something walking a path toward the house. Could it be Linda? I ran to the door and opened it. If she'd gotten lost, maybe I should give a shout and give her some bearings. I stood outside the cabin, calling her name in the direction I had seen the trees move. Linda didn't respond, so I shouted louder. I could now see and hear whoever that was approaching more quickly. The thought occurred to my drowsy mind that it couldn't be Linda out there, since Linda had obviously driven away in her car. She couldn't be driving through those thick woods, so therefore that could not possibly be her approaching. So who had I just shouted to? A chill shot through me as I realized that I might not like what I saw when whoever that was finally emerged from the forest. And then, a second later, I saw this immense beast that I first interpreted as some kind of a minotaur crash out of hiding and into my consciousness. The legs looked to me like horse legs, and yet this was some kind of a large man. It had a hairy but unclothed chest wider than that of Schwarzenegger. Its head, which I had interpreted as a bull's head, actually bore no horns and far more closely resembled a dog than a bull. This was a broad-chested, muscular, and man-like dog, and I wondered how to greet such a kind of a person. I was raised to be culturally sensitive, and I wondered how to address this man. But he bore his teeth at me, growling and glaring, bending down into a position that reminded me of a snake coiling and readying itself to attack. This didn't seem like a man to me any longer. It seemed like a giant dog with a weightlifter's body. "Good boy," I said. "Down, boy." Now he was barking so loud, it made my ears ring, and now it was racing toward me, clearly intending to bite big chunks out of my well-padded butt. I got inside. I locked the door, and the Dogman slammed into it so hard that I saw it bend in the middle. I wondered how many more hits like that the door could take, but the Dogman was not interested in doing the same thing the same way twice. I saw the immense dog-brained man run back and forth around the front of the house, seemingly looking for some kind of entrance. It was frantic, and couldn't seem to stay in one spot for more than a second. It would see me through a window and bark at me, snarl at me, then immediately return to running back and forth, looking in the same places, over and over again, for an entrance into the house. Although it was as vicious as the fiercest dog had ever been, it was also utterly mindless and incapable of creating a plan or even thinking slightly complex thoughts. I watched the dog through the windows, remaining in the center of the cabin the entire time. I felt safer there, even though if that dog got in, I was a goner no matter where I stood. It had to have been running around for 10 minutes straight, just doing the same things over and over, but not in the same order. I was still panicked, but eventually it rolled down the emotional hill into this sort of zen-like, almost calm. Yes, there was a thing larger than me wanting to devour me racing around the cabin, but it was not inside with me, and I was in no immediate danger. I was relaxed and panicked at the same time. The creature seemed to go away after a while, and it became very quiet. I looked out a window, and it was truly dark out now. I wondered where Linda was, and if I would ever see her again. I wondered if I would survive the night. After around an hour, it hit me that the Dogman had not returned. Maybe that was that, and I would never see it again. Had I really seen it before? Maybe this strange situation had caused me to hallucinate the Dogman. I went over to the window I had been sitting at earlier and sat back down again, in order to see down the road in case Linda was coming back for me that night. Again, it was very boring and uneventful for a while, and I became drowsy, yawning to stay awake. Then, It was like someone tripped an alarm or flipped on a light switch as the Dogman was suddenly back, barking and snapping at the window I had been leaning against. I backed away, screaming in horror and freaking completely out. I think I was jumping up and down like a lunatic. That Dogman had surprised me so thoroughly. I don't even know what direction the creature came from. It was the jump scare of all jump scares, and I was incredibly angry at that Dogman in that moment. I grabbed something, I forget what, and I was going to break the window so I could get at that monster outside. Fortunately, I remembered that the glass was the only thing keeping the Dogman out, so I refrained from doing anything stupid. I just stood there, cursing a blue streak at the monster, until it started doing its weird back and forth racing around the house thing again, looking for a door it could run in and get at me. Once again, it tired after a while and went off someplace I couldn't see to regroup. I took a break to catch my breath and calm my beating heart, but I was pretty certain that thing had not gone very far off, and I was just as sure it would be back. A strange light sort of flew through the apartment, scaring me again and almost giving me a heart attack. I thought that now I was seeing a ghost, but I heard the sound of tires on gravel, and I knew it was a car outside. Racing to the window, I looked out, and I was pretty sure that was Linda's car I was looking at. Taking a chance, I opened the front door and stuck my head out there. The car doors opened, and all sorts of loud music spilled out, as well as 3 very drunk-seeming human beings. "Watch out," I told them. "Turn the music off. There's some kind of a werewolf monster in these woods." I don't know why I said it that way. It was a dumb way to tell them about it. Of course they laughed at me. Even if they had been sober, they would have laughed at a person talking about werewolves. They probably thought I was kidding, or else they thought I was more stoned than they were. But in either case, they laughed. Linda got out of the car and staggered into the cabin, not even seeming to notice that I was there. Both of the people she had with her seemed to be men, although I wasn't entirely sure about one of them. The music was still blasting from the car, which they had left wide open. After they went inside, I rushed over to the car, sat in the driver's seat, and turned the stupid radio off. Then I noticed that the keys were still in the ignition. I tried to remember if I had left anything inside the cabin, and drawing a blank, I started up that ignition, put the car in reverse, and began turning the vehicle around to drive myself back to the city. There was a long, narrow road leading to and from the cabin. It was essentially a driveway, as it led nowhere except from the place and to the main road. There was a stretch where both sides of the dirt drive are thick-packed with deep woods. The only lights that night were the car's headlights, and the tall, dark trees surrounding me were making me feel quite claustrophobic. Literally the exact thing I had been fearing happened. I saw the Dogman, the same one from before. I saw him run out on the path. He seemed to be crossing from my right to my left, and I don't think he was aware I was there at first. But then I caught him in the headlights, and he stopped moving forward, turning instead to glare at me and bark viciously. I had sort of been played with enough for one day, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. I took aim for the creature, and I prepared for impact, which never came. The Dogman easily avoided me, and I saw in the rear-view mirror that it was now chasing me. It ran on 2 legs like a man. I continued to floor it, skidding back and forth, almost losing control more than once. I made it to the main road, and I knew there still had to be another block to go before the highway would get me out of that area for good and permanent. I skidded all around that icy main road, lucky that it was nighttime and nobody else was driving there. Still, the Dogman pursued. He was willing to leave the woods and chase me through a neighborhood settled by humans. I was screaming all manner of obscenities at the creature, but apparently that's not effective in making a Dogman stop running after you. I turned onto the ramp leading up to the highway, and I'll be damned if that freaking Dogman didn't do the same thing. I saw that traffic was heavy for that time of night, and it didn't look like any of the speeding vehicles were going to be at all interested in letting me merge into traffic. I didn't have the option of waiting though, so I Steve McQueened Linda's fancy European whatever it was straight into traffic. I heard car tires squealing and beeping horns behind me. I felt one of Linda's rear bumpers getting a tap, and I saw that Dogman, now running on all fours, was finding it impossible to continue his pursuit as I sped away from the scene, leaving cars spinning out behind me all over the road. I remember crying the entire way home, jumping at every shadow, and certain I was still being chased. I parked the car under Linda's apartment and walked through the city to my home. I was lucky she didn't press charges against me for stealing her car, but I think she was so out of it that she just forgot that I was ever out there. I have no idea how she even got home, as I stopped calling her after that, not wanting to hear any more lectures. By the late 70s, I heard through the grapevine that she had married some lawyer. In the 80s, her husband became a very influential politician on a national level. You probably heard of him. But I didn't know her anymore by that time. I only knew her when she was a liberal and a feminist. Every time I would see her and her husband on TV, talking about morality and family values and just say no and all of that, it would bring my mind back to that crazy night when the battle pitted the early 70s Dogman versus the Swingers. Hey, it's me, Henry Lee Dogman, here to thank those of you who support all of us here at Scary Stories NYC. It really helps us if you click like and if you forward our videos or leave cool comments. If you can, it helps us even more when you let us share our 25 episode and growing collection of uncensored scary Dogman stories with you by becoming a paid subscriber at peterbernard.com. That's right, join our monthly club and get 25 stories right off the bat, each of them wilder than what we're allowed to tell you on this channel. Then, each Sunday, get another new scary story, usually a Dogman story, but always uncensored and secret, available nowhere else on the planet. Please consider joining us today at peterbernard.com and keep the scary stories coming. Thanks, everyone.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.